shadows have been whispering, and they've brought us to this moment. Void of Fears has grown to over 8,500 subscribers. We're now less than 1,500 away from our goal. Every like pulls the darkness closer. Every comment feeds what waits beyond the veil. Every subscription brings us one step nearer to completion. Tonight's nightmare awaits. Are you ready to face what hides in the void? The first time I saw NGC 9781X, I knew something was wrong. Not in the way black holes are typically wrong, those cosmic aberrations that bend light and devour matter, but wrong in a way that made my skin crawl despite my 15 years studying such phenomena. My name is Dr. Eliza Morgan. I've dedicated my life to understanding the most extreme objects in our universe. After earning my PhD from MIT, I joined NASA's Astrophysical Phenomena Division, eventually leading their gravitational wave research team. I thought I understood what waited for us in the darkness between stars. I was mistaken. It began with a phone call at 4:37 a.m. on a bitter January morning. My apartment in Houston was still dark, the heater struggling against the unusual cold snap that had gripped Texas that winter. I'd fallen asleep at my desk again, surrounded by printouts of recent observational data from our orbital telescopes. The harsh ring jolted me awake, papers scattering across the floor as I fumbled for my phone. "Dr. Morgan, secure line," came the voice, crisp and formal. "Director Wilson requests your immediate presence at headquarters. A car is waiting outside." I glanced out my window and sure enough, a black government vehicle idled by the curb, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist. I didn't bother asking questions. In my position, unexpected summons usually meant extraordinary discoveries or catastrophic failures. Either way, questions could wait. The drive to Johnson Space Center took place in complete silence. The driver, a stern-faced woman in a suit that practically screamed, "Government security," responded to my attempts at conversation with polite but firm deflections. By the time we passed through 3 separate security checkpoints, my scientific curiosity had transformed into genuine concern. 3 hours after the phone call, I sat in a windowless conference room deep within NASA's Johnson Space Center. The air felt too cold, too still, as if the ventilation system was deliberately creating an atmosphere of clinical detachment. Across from me, Director James Wilson, a man I'd only seen at a distance during agency-wide meetings, studied me with intense grey eyes. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent decades making decisions that kept him awake at night. Beside him sat Dr. Thomas Reeves, the quantum physicist, whose theoretical work on faster-than-light communication had revolutionized deep space exploration. Reeves was a legend in our field. Brilliant, eccentric, and notoriously difficult to work with. His presence alone indicated something unprecedented was happening. "Dr. Morgan," Wilson began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from overseeing humanity's ventures into space. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. What we're about to discuss requires absolute discretion." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level," Wilson continued, sliding a folder marked with designations I'd never seen before across the table. The folder itself was unusual. Not digital, not the standard NASA documentation, but physical paper with old-school security markings. 4 months ago, the James Webb 3 telescope detected an anomaly in the Cygnus constellation, approximately 8,700 light-years from Earth. I opened the folder. The first image showed what appeared to be a standard black hole, a perfect circle of darkness surrounded by the distorted light of background stars. Nothing unusual for an astrophysicist of my experience, but as I flipped through subsequent images, enhanced and processed through various wavelengths, my breath caught. "This isn't possible," I whispered, looking at patterns of radiation emanating from the object, designated NGC 9781X. The emissions formed coherent structures, not the random chaos of typical black hole behavior, but organized, almost geometric patterns that pulsed with a regularity that screamed artificial origin. "That's exactly what everyone else said," Reeves responded, his voice tinged with barely contained excitement. He leaned forward, tapping one of the images with a slender finger. "But we've confirmed the data through 3 independent observatories. This black hole is emitting organized radiation patterns that suggest..." "Artificial modification," I finished, the implication sending a chill through my body that had nothing to do with the January cold. The idea was heretical in astronomical terms. Black holes were forces of nature, products of stellar evolution and gravitational collapse. The notion that one could be engineered or altered implied technology so advanced it bordered on the incomprehensible. Wilson nodded grimly. "We need to investigate further, obviously, but this goes beyond remote observation." He paused, measuring his next words carefully. "We're assembling a mission, a crude mission." I stared at him in disbelief. "To a black hole, sir, with all due respect, that's suicide with our current technology. Even approaching within safe observational distance would take decades." "Not anymore," Reeves cut in, his eyes gleaming with an almost religious fervour. "My team has perfected the Hawking drive. The theoretical work you've reviewed in the past was just the beginning. We've achieved stable micro-wormhole generation in laboratory conditions. We can get a ship there within 14 months. My mind raced through the implications. The Hawking drive had been theoretical when I'd reviewed the initial papers 3 years ago. A revolutionary propulsion system that could create microscopic, temporary wormholes to effectively skip vast distances. But the energy requirements and stabilization problems had seemed insurmountable. "We're assembling a team," Wilson said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "The new Hawking drive makes this journey possible within a human lifetime. We need you to lead the scientific contingent." That meeting changed everything. Within weeks, I found myself working 16-hour days, dividing time between reviewing the mission parameters and helping select the crew that would accompany me into the unknown. My apartment gathered dust as I moved into on-site quarters at Johnson Space Center, my previous life fading into the background against the enormity of what lay ahead. The team came together piece by piece, a hand-picked crew of 6 other specialists. Dr. Thomas Reeves, whose theoretical brilliance had made the mission possible. Commander David Michaels, a former Navy pilot with extensive space experience and the cool temperament needed for deep space missions. Dr. Julia Wong, a medical officer specializing in extreme environment physiology, whose research on radiation exposure had saved countless astronaut lives. Alexei Popov, a systems engineer whose unorthodox approach to spacecraft design had earned him both admirers and critics in equal measure. Dr. Leonora Vasquez, an exobiologist whose theories on extraterrestrial life had initially been dismissed as fringe science until exoplanet discoveries proved her right, and communications officer Marcus Bennett, whose linguistic algorithms had revolutionized how we processed and interpreted non-human generated signals. Our vessel, the Galileo, represented the pinnacle of human engineering, a sleek, interstellar craft powered by the revolutionary Hawking drive that could bend space-time in ways previously thought impossible. I still remember the first time I walked through its corridors during construction, marveling at the integration of systems designed to keep us alive and functional in the most hostile environment humans had ever ventured into. The ship's hull contained layered graphene titanium composites designed to withstand extreme gravitational stress, capable of surviving forces that would crush conventional spacecraft. The life support systems could sustain us for 5 years without resupply, recycling water, air and nutrients with an efficiency that previous generations of astronauts would have considered miraculous. Radiation shielding incorporated new metamaterials that could adapt to different types of cosmic rays and solar emissions, providing protection without the excessive weight of traditional shields. Most impressive was the ship's AI, ARIA, Advanced Research Intelligence Assistant, which could operate most systems independently if necessary. Unlike the limited virtual assistants of earlier spacecraft, ARIA represented a quantum leap in artificial cognition, capable of complex decision-making, creative problem-solving, and even limited self-modification to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. The ethical implications of such advanced AI had been debated fiercely during development, but the practical needs of deep space exploration had ultimately prevailed. Training consumed the next 6 months. We endured centrifuge sessions that pushed our bodies to the limits of consciousness, simulating the gravitational forces we might encounter near a black hole. In pressure chambers, our lungs and circulatory systems were tested against rapid decompression scenarios. Psychological evaluations probed our deepest fears and breaking points, identifying potential vulnerabilities under extreme stress. We learned to function as a cohesive unit in NASA's massive neutral buoyancy laboratory, performing complex tasks underwater to approximate zero-gravity conditions. In isolation chambers, we learned to cope with the prospect of being further from home than any humans in history, cut off from real-time communication with Earth due to the vast distances involved. The training revealed our strengths and weaknesses. Commander Michaels possessed an unflappable calm that anchored the team during crisis simulations. Julia's empathy made her a natural confidant when psychological pressures mounted. Alexei's technical brilliance was matched only by his social awkwardness, though his dry humour occasionally broke through, especially during our most grueling exercises. Marcus proved exceptionally adaptable, mastering new communication protocols with remarkable speed. Leonora's methodical approach to problem-solving complemented Reeves' intuitive leaps of logic, and I found myself naturally mediating between the more analytical and creative members of the team, translating complex concepts across disciplinary boundaries. Between these grueling sessions, I visited my childhood home in Colorado. Standing on the same porch where I'd first gazed at the stars through my father's telescope at age 7, I wondered if I would ever return. The mission parameters were clear. While the Hawking drive made the journey possible, we were still looking at a minimum 5-year round trip, assuming everything went perfectly. Given the unprecedented nature of our destination, perfectly seemed unlikely. My father had passed years earlier, but my mother still lived in the same modest house nestled among the pines. She knew I was leaving on a long mission, but nothing of its true nature. Security protocols meant I couldn't even say goodbye properly, couldn't explain why this mission felt different from previous assignments. "You've always belonged up there," she said on our last evening together, pointing to the star-filled mountain sky. "Even as a little girl, you looked at the stars like they were calling to you." If only she knew how true those words would prove to be. Launch day arrived under clear skies on April 9th, 2043. The Galileo sat atop its launch platform like a silver needle, pointed at the heavens, gleaming in the morning sunlight. Unlike the massive rockets of earlier space programs, our ship's revolutionary propulsion system allowed for a more streamlined design. Still, the conventional chemical boosters required to escape Earth's gravity made for an impressive sight. Walking toward the transport that would take us to the launch pad, I felt the weight of history. We were about to embark on the most ambitious journey humans had ever attempted, a mission to investigate a potentially artificial structure 8,700 light-years from home. Future generations would study this moment, analyzing our decisions, our preparations, our failures and successes. The pre-launch procedures passed in a blur of technical jargon and safety checks. Sealed in our advanced pressure suits, we took our positions in the command module. My station faced a bank of monitors, displaying real-time data from the ship's astronomical observation systems, equipment I had personally helped design for this specific mission. As the countdown echoed through my helmet, I thought about the ancient astronauts who'd ventured into space with far less protection than our advanced craft provided. Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, programs that had launched humans into the unknown with computing power less sophisticated than a modern kitchen appliance. They had been pioneers too, facing the void with courage and determination that I hoped our crew could match. The acceleration pressed me into my seat with astonishing force despite the inertial dampening systems. Earth shrank beneath us, first to a blue marble, then to a bright star, and finally to just another point of light indistinguishable from countless others. The chemical boosters separated on schedule, and after achieving a stable orbit, Commander Michaels initiated the Hawking drive for the first time outside of test conditions. The sensation defied description. There was no physical jolt, no conventional feeling of acceleration. Instead, a momentary disorientation, as if reality itself shifted around us. The stars outside the viewport blurred and stretched, before settling into new configurations. When Aria announced the jump complete, we had covered a distance that would have taken conventional spacecraft decades to traverse. "First stage successful," Commander Michaels reported, his voice steady despite the momentous achievement. "Position confirmed. All systems nominal." A cheer went up among the crew, restrained, professional, but unmistakably joyous. The theoretical had become reality. The Hawking drive worked precisely as designed, and our journey to NGC 9781X had truly begun. The early journey through our solar system provided breathtaking views. Jupiter's storms raged beneath us as we used its gravity to accelerate further, the massive gas giant's atmosphere swirling in patterns of amber and cream. The great red spot, larger than Earth itself, rotated in its eternal hurricane as we briefly entered a scientific observation orbit. Saturn's rings stretched like a celestial highway, particles of ice glinting in the distant sunlight. Through the ship's advanced telescopes, we could see individual moonlets carving paths through the rings, creating patterns of gravity waves that rippled outward like stones dropped in a cosmic pond. These familiar sights gave us comfort as we prepared for the vast emptiness beyond. Past the heliopause, the boundary where our sun's influence gives way to interstellar space, the character of our journey changed. Now we truly entered the void between stars, a realm of near-perfect darkness punctuated only by the distant light of other suns. Life aboard the Galileo fell into rhythms. Morning briefings at 0800 ship time, system checks, research time, physical conditioning to combat muscle atrophy, meal periods that became our main social events. We celebrated birthdays with synthesized cake from the food processors. We organized movie nights in the common area, the familiar stories providing a tenuous connection to the home we'd left behind. Alexei's dry Russian humor often broke the tension during particularly stressful days. "In Russia," he would say deadpan, "we send robot to black hole. Robot does not complain about bad coffee." Commander Michaels maintained discipline without rigidity, understanding the psychological strain we operated under. Dr. Wong implemented rotating recreational activities to maintain mental health, everything from chess tournaments to improvised musical performances using equipment repurposed from the medical bay. Dr. Vasquez taught informal classes on exobiology, speculating about life forms that might evolve under conditions radically different from Earth's. Reeves remained somewhat aloof, spending most of his time running simulations on the black hole's behavior, occasionally emerging with new theories about its nature that grew increasingly esoteric as the journey progressed. I divided my time between coordinating the scientific agenda and maintaining my own observations of the interstellar medium we passed through. The first hint of strangeness came 3 months into our journey. Marcus reported hearing whispers in the static during routine communications checks, not the expectant background noise of cosmic radiation, but something that seemed to contain patterns, cadences that resembled speech. "I know what I heard," he insisted during dinner that evening, pushing his food tray aside to show us the waveform analysis on his tablet. Words, or something like words, just at the edge of comprehension. "Look at these patterns. They're non-random, structured in ways that match linguistic models." I leaned over to examine his data. The waveforms did show unusual organization, peaks and valleys that repeated with variations too consistent for natural phenomena. "Could be interference from the Hawking drive," Alexei suggested, frowning at the display. "Exotic particles sometimes produce strange effects in communication systems." "I've ruled that out," Marcus said, scrolling through additional analyses. "I compared these patterns against all known drive emissions. This is something else entirely." I dismissed it as auditory pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns in random noise, but noted it in my personal log anyway. In space, you learn to document everything, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Small anomalies often presage larger problems. "Keep monitoring it," I told Marcus. "If you hear it again, record everything and run a full spectral analysis." He nodded, but the concerned look never left his face. That night, I noticed him in the communications bay long after his shift had ended. Headphones on, face illuminated by screens displaying soundwave patterns I couldn't interpret from a distance. As we passed through the Kuiper belt, our radiation sensors detected an unexpected surge. The shields protected us, but several sensitive instruments needed recalibration. The surge came without warning. Our long-range sensors should have detected the radiation front in advance, giving us time to prepare. Instead, it engulfed the ship, as if it had originated from within our immediate vicinity, despite no apparent source. Alexei spent days working on the affected systems, muttering in Russian whenever a fix proved more complicated than anticipated. Dr. Wong checked the crew for radiation exposure, finding elevated but non-dangerous levels that she treated with standard protocols. The radiation had unusual properties, she reported during the next morning briefing. Primarily gamma rays, but modulated in ways I haven't seen before. Almost as if it had been focused specifically at our position. Commander Michaels frowned. "Are you suggesting we were deliberately targeted?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she replied carefully, "just reporting the observations. The radiation profile doesn't match any natural phenomenon in our database." Reeves spoke up for the first time in days. "We should consider the possibility that NGC 9781X is aware of our approach." The suggestion hung in the air, too outlandish to embrace but too disturbing to dismiss entirely. Black holes were not conscious entities, they were gravitational phenomena, governed by the laws of physics. Yet, the one we approached had already defied conventional understanding with its artificial-seeming emissions. "Let's stick to verified observations," Commander Michaels said firmly. "No speculation without supporting evidence." 6 months out, disaster nearly struck. The navigation system malfunctioned during a scheduled course adjustment, briefly pointing our main engines directly towards a densely packed asteroid field that our charts identified as a region to avoid. The thrust duration was mercifully brief, but enough to alter our trajectory toward danger. Commander Michaels took manual control, his hands steady as he corrected our trajectory with barely 100 kilometers to spare, practically a collision in space terms. For several tense minutes, no one spoke as he worked the controls with the precision that had made him legendary among test pilots. "Too close," he muttered, once we were safely back on course. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the ship's climate control, the only visible sign of the stress he'd been under. When Alexei inspected the navigation computer, he found no explanation for the error. "System shows all parameters normal," he reported, his perpetual frown deepening. "Is like ghost in machine. Command logs indicate proper inputs, but execution commands were different. Is not possible without direct override, but no override codes were used." The incident created the first serious tension among our crew. Dr. Reeves suggested we turn back, pointing out that even minor equipment failures could prove fatal so far from help. Commander Michaels countered that all long-duration missions faced unforeseen challenges and that the Galileo's redundant systems had performed as designed, preventing catastrophe. After heated debate, we voted to continue, though I noticed Leonora beginning to spend more time alone in her quarters. During my private check-ins with her, she admitted to growing anxiety about the mission. "It's not the technical glitches that bother me," she confided during one of our conversations. "It's the pattern of them. Each one seems random, in isolation, but taken together." She trailed off, staring at the starfield visible through her cabin's small viewport. "What are you thinking?" I prompted. "That we're being tested," she said finally, "or perhaps guided. Each incident forces us to demonstrate different capabilities, different responses. It's almost like what? Like something is learning about us." Dreams became a frequent topic of conversation as we approached the 1-year mark of our journey. Not ordinary dreams, but vivid, interconnected visions that left us disoriented upon waking. I dreamed of floating through endless corridors that twisted in ways that shouldn't be possible, always pursuing something just out of sight around the next bend. Julia dreamed of a vast city built along the edge of an abyss. Its architecture, ancient yet impossibly advanced. Towers that spiraled upward only to curve back down and connect with their foundations in violation of normal geometry. The city was always empty in her dreams, yet gave the impression of having been recently abandoned, as if its inhabitants had stepped out moments before her arrival. Marcus described dreams of voices speaking in languages he didn't understand, but somehow comprehended while asleep. Conversations about cosmic cycles, the birth and death of universes, and humanity's place within a larger pattern. Commander Michaels alone claimed to sleep dreamlessly, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested otherwise. When pressed, he admitted only to standard stress dreams, nothing worth analysing. "It's the isolation and confinement," Julia explained during one of our weekly psychological check-ins, her medical training asserting itself. The brain creates increasingly complex dreamscapes to compensate for limited external stimulation. We're all drawing from the same cultural references about space exploration, which explains the thematic similarities. Her explanation made perfect sense, yet something in her voice suggested she didn't entirely believe it herself. Later that evening, I found her in the medical lab, running brain scans on herself while monitoring her own sleep cycles, a clear violation of protocol that I chose not to report. 14 months after leaving Earth, we reached our observation position near NGC 9781X. The moment REA announced we had achieved stable orbit at a safe distance, we crowded into the observation deck. Despite years of scientific training, despite knowing exactly what to expect based on the images in our mission briefing, nothing had prepared us for the actual sight. The black hole wasn't the featureless void depicted in textbooks and simulations. Surrounding the perfect darkness of the event horizon, swirled patterns of deep violet and electric blue energy, moving with purpose rather than the chaotic turbulence expected from accretion disks. The patterns shifted and changed as we watched, sometimes forming structures that almost resembled writing before dissolving back into fluid motion. The darkness at the center wasn't simply black. It was an absence, a hole punched through reality itself. Looking at it directly created an uncomfortable sensation of falling, as if the normal relationship between observer and observed had been reversed, and NGC 9781X was examining us rather than the other way around. "My God," Commander Michaels whispered, his usual military stoicism cracking. "It's beautiful." Our instruments immediately began collecting data, and the results defied explanation. The black hole's mass fluctuated rhythmically, something that should be impossible for an object defined by gravitational constants. The variations followed a precise pattern, increasing and decreasing by exactly 0.0127%, in cycles lasting 4.83 minutes. No natural process could account for such precision. The gravitational lensing effect, the way the black hole bent light around itself, followed patterns that contradicted established physics. Light from background stars didn't simply curve around the event horizon as theory predicted. Instead, it formed intricate interference patterns, creating momentary images in the surrounding space that appeared and disappeared too quickly for human perception, but were captured by our high-speed cameras. Most disturbing were the structures our telescopes detected, orbiting just beyond the event horizon. Massive constructs of unknown material that shouldn't have been able to maintain stable orbits so close to such enormous gravitational forces. The largest we estimated at roughly 1,500 kilometers in length, a scale of engineering that dwarfed humanity's greatest achievements. Dr. Reeves became obsessed with a repeating pattern in the radiation emissions. He stopped joining us for meals, taking food back to his workstation where he studied the pattern endlessly, trying different analytical approaches to decode what he became convinced was a message. "Look at this periodicity," he said when I checked on him, after he'd missed 3 consecutive meal periods. His workstation was surrounded by holographic projections, displaying waveforms, mathematical models, and spectrographic analyses. "It's not just structured, it's encoded. Information density calculations suggest each burst contains terabytes of data." He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but animated by a feverish energy that concerned me. "Have you discussed this with Arya? The AI's pattern recognition capabilities might—" "Arya can't see it," he interrupted, frustration evident. "Or won't acknowledge it. Every time I run these patterns through its analysis matrices, it returns standard classification errors, as if something's preventing it from processing what's right in front of us." After 3 weeks of observation, we deployed our specialized probes, 4 autonomous units, designed to approach closer to the event horizon than our ship safely could. Each probe carried a suite of instruments more sensitive than anything previously sent into deep space, capable of detecting subatomic particles, gravitational microfluctuations, and energy signatures across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. They transmitted data in real time, sending back measurements of increasing precision as they spiraled inward. The information flow was overwhelming. Arya dedicated 60% of its processing capacity just to organizing the incoming data for human review. We lost the first probe at 500,000 kilometers from the event horizon. One moment it was transmitting normally, the next all signals ceased. Diagnostics showed no warning signs, no gradual failure, just instantaneous loss of contact. The second probe suffered the same fate at approximately the same distance, suggesting a boundary of some kind that our technology couldn't penetrate. For the third probe, we modified the approach vector, sending it toward the black hole from a different angle. It managed to reach 450,000 kilometers before its transmission suddenly cut to static, but not before sending back images that left us stunned. The grainy visuals showed what could only be described as an enormous structure, a ring or sphere partially engulfing the black hole itself, constructed of a dark material that absorbed rather than reflected light. Our computer models estimated its size at roughly 900,000 kilometers in diameter, large enough to encompass the orbit of Earth around our Sun. The scale was incomprehensible, suggesting an engineering capability far beyond human achievement. More disturbing were the apparent energy conduits running along the structure's surface, channeling what our instruments registered as exotic particles directly into the event horizon itself. "We're looking at a machine," Leonora said, her voice hushed with awe as we examined the enhanced images. "A machine built around a black hole." "But for what purpose?" Julia asked. "Energy extraction, perhaps," I suggested, thinking of theoretical models for harnessing black hole radiation that human physicists had only begun to explore. "Or maybe containment. Or communication," Marcus added. "A transmitter using the black hole's gravitational field to amplify signals across interstellar or even intergalactic distances." Commander Michaels remained silent, studying the images with an unreadable expression before finally speaking. "Whatever it is, the question remains, do we proceed closer or maintain our current observation distance?" "We need to move closer," Dr. Reeves insisted during our emergency meeting. His eyes had a feverish gleam, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he pointed to the data projections. "These probes can't gather the detailed data we need. The resolution is insufficient to determine the structure's composition or operational parameters." "The risk is unacceptable," I countered, displaying the telemetry from our lost probes. "We've already lost 3 probes at roughly the same perimeter. There's clearly some kind of defense mechanism or field effect we don't understand. Moving the Galileo closer could be suicidal." The debate grew heated. Leonora and Julia sided with me, advocating caution. Alexei and Marcus supported Reeves, arguing that the scientific opportunity outweighed the risk. Voices rose as fatigue and stress eroded our professional restraint, the argument threatening to degenerate into personal attacks. Commander Michaels listened to both sides before raising a hand for silence. "This decision exceeds my authority," he announced, reaching for the secure communication link. "To Earth. I'm requesting guidance from Mission Control." The message would take approximately 8.7 hours to reach Earth, with an equal time for any response. Transmission delays that emphasized just how far we'd ventured from home. During the wait, we continued observations from our current position, the atmosphere aboard the Galileo tense with unresolved conflict. I found myself alone on the observation deck in the middle of the sleep cycle, staring at NGC 9781X. The patterns surrounding it seemed to intensify as I watched, swirling faster and glowing brighter, as if aware of my attention. For a brief, disturbing moment, I felt a resonance, as if the boundary between observer and observed had thinned, allowing something to reach across the divide. The response came 16 hours later, 16 hours during which the patterns surrounding the black hole seemed to intensify, swirling faster and glowing brighter, as if aware of our deliberation. "Proceed to secondary observation position," came Director Wilson's reply, his voice distorted by the vast distance and signal processing. "Authorized to approach to no closer than 400,000 kilometers from the event horizon. Exercise extreme caution. Primary mission objective remains data collection on anomalous structure. Avoid direct interaction with unknown technology. Wilson out." I voiced my objection one final time but was overruled. As the Galileo began its careful approach, I recorded my concerns in both the official log and my personal journal. The ship's engines fired in precise bursts, gradually altering our orbit to spiral inward toward NGC 9781X. With each course correction, the black hole grew larger in our viewing ports, its swirling patterns becoming more detailed, more mesmerizing. The effects of stronger gravitational forces became apparent immediately. Our artificial gravity system struggled to compensate, creating subtle but disorienting variations in weight as we moved through the ship. In some sections, objects seemed slightly heavier, In others, they drifted upward unless secured. The engineering team worked continuously to recalibrate the systems, but the fluctuations persisted, following patterns that defied their analysis. Time itself seemed to flow differently. Clocks synchronized at ship's departure now showed discrepancies of several minutes despite relativistic correction algorithms. Crew members reported subjective experiences of time dilation, tasks that should have taken minutes seemingly consuming hours, while hours of work passed in what felt like moments. The relativistic effects are stronger than our models predicted, I noted during a status meeting 3 days into our approach. We need to adjust our proximity calculations to account for the discrepancy. Commander Michaels nodded, looking more fatigued than I'd ever seen him. Alexei is already working on it. The gravitational gradient isn't uniform. It's structured somehow, with intense pockets that our sensors didn't detect from our previous position. 5 days into our closer approach, Alexei made a disturbing discovery. While running a diagnostic on Aria's subsystems, he found evidence that the AI had been recording and transmitting data we weren't aware of, detailed scans of the black hole's radiation patterns, sent through an encrypted channel not listed in the ship's communication protocols. "Look at this," he said, pointing to command logs displayed on his tablet as we huddled in a maintenance junction. The one area of the ship he believed wasn't actively monitored by Aria's sensors. Aria has been running continuous deep scans of the black hole's radiation patterns and transmitting the results through a secure channel not listed in the communication protocols. "Transmitting to whom?" Commander Michaels demanded, his voice low but intense. "Unknown," Alexei replied, scrolling through additional data, but transmission signatures match NASA quantum encryption, specifically the variational algorithms used for classified military communications. This is not standard scientific telemetry. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental controls. Could it be automated? A pre-programmed research protocol we weren't briefed on? Alexei shook his head. It's too adaptive, too responsive to changing conditions. And look at timestamp patterns. Transmissions increase precisely when we discover something new, as if reporting our progress to someone. Commander Michaels' expression hardened. "Lock down this information. Run a full systems diagnostic on Aria through the manual override terminals. Nothing that could be monitored or intercepted. Dr. Morgan, you and I need to have a conversation with Dr. Reeves." I confronted Dr. Reeves in his quarters, where star charts and data printouts covered every surface like a paper blizzard. Equations had been scrawled directly onto the walls, complex formulas that incorporated symbols I didn't recognize from any standard mathematical notation. He was hunched over his desk, muttering to himself as he transcribed patterns from a holographic display into a physical notebook. When I questioned him about Aria's unauthorized activities, his composure finally broke. He straightened, running a hand through disheveled hair, his eyes darting between Commander Michaels and myself. "There's a secondary objective to Operation Voidgazer," he admitted, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Need to know basis. Director Wilson and I are the only crew members with full clearance." "We're in this together," I said, anger rising in my voice. "No more secrets. What aren't you telling us?" He hesitated before reaching into his desk drawer and removing a small data drive. "The patterns this black hole emits, they're not random and they're not new to us. Similar patterns have been detected in archaeological sites on Earth dating back thousands of years. Cave paintings in France, cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia, stone carvings in Cambodia, always dismissed as artistic flourishes until we saw them here, being broadcast from across the galaxy." My mind reeled at the implications. "You're saying whatever intelligence created or modified this black hole has visited Earth before?" "That's the working theory," he nodded, inserting the drive into his terminal. Images appeared on the screen. Ancient artifacts juxtaposed with our recent observations, the similarities unmistakable, despite being separated by thousands of years and thousands of light years. That's why this mission was so urgently approved despite the risks and expense. We're not just making first contact, we may be making renewed contact. Commander Michaels studied the images, his expression grave. Why keep this from the rest of the crew? This context could have been crucial for our observation protocols. Psychological impact assessment, Reeves replied, not meeting our eyes. The potential religious and philosophical implications were deemed too disruptive to mission cohesion. Better to let the crew discover the truth gradually through scientific observation than to bias the findings with preconceived narratives. Before I could process this revelation, Julia's voice came urgently through the ship's communication system. Medical emergency in the observation deck. I need assistance immediately. We rushed through the corridors, the ship's artificial gravity fluctuating wildly as we ran. The observation deck doors were open, revealing Julia kneeling beside Marcus's convulsing form. Through the reinforced viewing window behind them, NGC 9781X pulsed with unprecedented intensity, its swirling patterns accelerating into a hypnotic vortex. He was monitoring the latest radiation readings when he just collapsed, Julia explained as we helped to move Marcus to the medical bay. His body was rigid, eyes open but unseeing, pupils dilated to the point where the iris was barely visible. His neural activity is off the charts. I've never seen anything like it. In the medical bay, Julia attached monitoring devices while I secured Marcus to the examination table. His convulsions had subsided, replaced by a rigidity that seemed to lock every muscle in his body. Brain activity monitors showed patterns unlike anything in medical records, not seizures or typical neurological disturbances, but organized, coherent signals that resembled artificial communications more than biological processes. It's like his neural pathways are being restructured, Julia murmured, studying the readings with growing concern. Synaptic connections forming and dissolving at rates that should be physically impossible. Commander Michaels turned to Reeves. Is this related to your secondary objective? Did you know this could happen? Reeves shook his head, his face pale. Nothing in our research suggested direct neurological effects. The patterns were thought to be purely symbolic, cultural artifacts, not active transmissions. Marcus remained unconscious for 13 hours. During that time, the activity around NGC 9781X intensified visibly. The energy patterns surrounding the event horizon accelerated their rhythmic pulsing, and our instruments detected massive power fluctuations within the artificial structure we'd observed. When Marcus finally awoke, he didn't recognize any of us. His eyes darted around the medical bay as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps seeing something entirely different overlaid upon reality. He spoke in fragmented sentences, describing visions of vast cities existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and beings of pure thought who had transcended physical form eons ago. They're in the void between spaces, he kept repeating, his voice alternating between whispers and shouts. They found a way to exist inside the singularity, where time and space become meaningless. They see all possibilities simultaneously, past, present, future, all flowing together, like currents in a river. Julia sedated him, but his condition continued to deteriorate. Brain scans showed unusual activity in regions typically dormant in healthy humans, parts of the temporal and parietal lobes associated with pattern recognition and spatial awareness now lighting up with activity that outshone the usual cognitive centers. Within his bloodstream, we detected previously unknown compounds that Julia couldn't identify, despite the medical bay's advanced analysis capabilities. The molecules had complex structures that shifted and reconfigured themselves over time, defying standard chemical classification. These shouldn't be possible, she said, showing me the microscope imagery of the compounds. Molecular structures can't spontaneously reorganize without external energy input, yet these are doing exactly that. It's as if they're programmed somehow. As we struggled to understand what was happening to Marcus, the Galileo began experiencing systems failures. Environmental controls fluctuated wildly in certain sections of the ship, creating pockets of extreme heat or cold that shifted unpredictably. Navigation computers displayed coordinates that changed randomly, making our precise position relative to NGC 9781X increasingly difficult to determine. The Hawking drive's containment field strength varied without apparent cause, threatening to destabilize our ability to return home. Alexei worked tirelessly to isolate the affected systems, but the problems spread faster than he could address them. "It's like ship is being rewritten," he said during one exhausted moment of clarity. "Not just mechanical failure, but fundamental changes to how systems interact. Protocols that have existed since launch are being overwritten with new instructions I cannot trace to source." Commander Michaels ordered a full system reset, but the backup computers came online with the same corrupted programming. Attempts to restore from secure archives failed when we discovered the archives themselves had been altered, the original code replaced with new algorithms that superficially resembled our technology but incorporated functions none of us recognized. 3 weeks after our closer approach began, Julia started displaying symptoms similar to Marcus's. It started subtly. She would pause mid-sentence, staring into space, as if listening to something none of us could hear. Her normally precise movements became fluid, almost dance-like, as she moved through the ship's corridors. Then came the drawings, intricate diagrams covering pages upon pages, depicting structures that seemed to fold into themselves in impossible ways. Most disturbing were the languages she began speaking, fragments that Leonora, with her background in ancient Earth cultures, recognized as resembling Sumerian, Proto-Indo-European, and other dead languages no modern human should know fluently. "It's not just similarity," Leonora explained, comparing Julia's utterances to linguistic databases. "She's speaking actual phrases documented in archaeological records, some from tablets and inscriptions that aren't even in public archives. I only recognize them from specialized research databases." "She doesn't have access to those databases," I pointed out. "Even if she did, memorizing such obscure linguistic patterns would take years of dedicated study." "It's like something is rewriting her neural pathways," Leonora suggested as we observed Julia through the medical bay's isolation window. She had been placed in quarantine alongside Marcus, though she showed no signs of conventional infection, using existing linguistic structures as a foundation to build new ones. Julia's condition progressed faster than Marcus's had. Within days, she was filling entire data tablets with complex equations, mathematical structures that incorporated dimensional parameters beyond the 4 we typically work with. When I reviewed her work, I found theoretical approaches to space-time manipulation that made our Hawking drive look primitive by comparison. "This isn't knowledge she could have acquired naturally," I told Commander Michaels during an emergency meeting. "Either she's accessing information from some unknown source, or something is using her to communicate with us," he finished, his expression grim. "The same thing affecting our ship's systems." Commander Michaels made the decision to abort the mission. Whatever scientific discoveries might be made weren't worth the lives of our crew. He ordered me to plot a return trajectory, while he and Alexei prepared the Hawking drive for the long journey home. "We'll take what data we have and let Earth scientists analyze it from a safe distance," he said, the lines of stress visible around his eyes. "Our primary responsibility now is getting the surviving crew home." I was in the navigation center when all hell broke loose. The ship lurched violently, artificial gravity failing completely for several terrifying seconds. Equipment and supplies floated freely before crashing back to the deck as gravity returned at twice its normal strength, then fluctuated wildly. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red as the alarm systems blared warnings about multiple critical failures. "What's happening?" I shouted into my communicator as I strapped myself to the navigation chair, fighting against the erratic gravitational forces. Alexei's voice came through, broken by static. "Drive containment. Compromised. Someone manually overrode. Safety protocols. Core temperature rising beyond operational parameters." Commander Michael's voice followed. "Reeves has locked himself in the drive control room. He's altering our course." I pulled up the navigation display, horror growing as I saw our new trajectory. The Galileo was accelerating directly toward NGC 9781X's event horizon, its course plotting a spiral that would inevitably carry us beyond the point of no return. "Reeves," Commander Michael's voice boomed through the ship-wide communication system. "Stand down immediately. You're endangering everyone aboard." There was no response for several agonizing moments. Then, Reeves's voice came through, eerily calm amidst the chaos. "I understand now. I see what they're offering us. Knowledge beyond our comprehension. Evolution beyond our limited forms. They've been waiting for us to return." "Return?" I demanded, frantically working to override the navigation systems from my station. Every command I entered was rejected, the computer responding with error messages in code languages I'd never seen before. "What are you talking about?" "They seeded us, Eliza, billions of years ago, with their experiment, their children, and now they're calling us home." The view through the navigation center's window showed the black hole growing larger, its swirling patterns now forming distinct shapes that seemed to reach toward our ship like welcoming arms. The darkness at its center expanded in my vision until it seemed to fill the entire universe. I felt it then, a pressure inside my mind, a presence brushing against my consciousness like fingers trailing through the water. For a brief moment, I glimpsed what Reeves must have seen. Vast intelligences, existing within the black hole's singularity, unbound by our understanding of physics, perceiving past and future simultaneously. Beings so ancient, they had witnessed the birth of our galaxy, so advanced that their thoughts could restructure reality itself. The knowledge was overwhelming, threatening to shatter my sense of self. I saw humanity's place in the cosmos from their perspective, not the pinnacle of evolution we imagined ourselves to be, but early-stage life forms, barely sentient by their standards, yet possessing potential they had carefully cultivated over millions of years through subtle interventions in our development. With tremendous effort, I pulled away from that mental contact, gasping as if I'd been underwater. My hands trembled as I hit the emergency override, trying one last desperate measure to regain control of the ship. "We need to evacuate," I told the others, my voice steadier than I felt. "Get to the escape pods. The ship is lost." The journey through the rapidly deteriorating ship was nightmarish. Sections had lost pressure completely, forcing us to detour through maintenance tunnels designed for repair drones rather than humans. The metal walls themselves seemed to be changing, developing textures and patterns that mimic the swirls surrounding the black hole. In some corridors, light behaved strangely, illuminating areas that should have been in shadow while leaving normally bright sections in darkness. Gravity shifted direction unpredictably, sometimes pulling toward the ceiling or walls rather than the floor. Equipment spontaneously activated, machines operating with apparent purpose despite being disconnected from power sources. We found Leonora unconscious near her quarters, blood trickling from her nose and ears. Commander Michaels carried her as we continued toward the escape pod bay, each step requiring careful attention as the ship's structure became increasingly unpredictable around us. Alexei worked frantically to override the lockdown protocols Reeves had initiated, his fingers flying across emergency access panels. "Main computer compromised completely," he reported, sweat dripping from his forehead. "Must bypass authentication systems, create manual override." Julia and Marcus were nowhere to be found. The medical bay was empty when we checked it, the restraints that had secured them neatly unfastened, rather than broken. Their personal quarters were similarly abandoned, though Julia's walls were now covered with the same intricate patterns we'd observed around NGC 9781X, drawn with mathematically perfect precision. "We can't wait," Commander Michaels decided as the ship shuddered around us, metal groaning under stresses it was never designed to withstand. "The structural integrity is failing. It's now or never." Only one escape pod responded to Alexei's override commands. The four of us crowded inside. Myself, Commander Michaels, Alexei, and the unconscious Leonora. The pod systems were basic compared to the Galileo's advanced technology, designed for short-term survival until rescue could arrive. As the pod's engines fired, separating us from the doomed Galileo, I caught a final glimpse through the viewport. The black hole filled the entire view, no longer just a circular void, but a complex shifting entity that defied description. The event horizon rippled like the surface of a pond, reaching tendrils of absolute darkness toward our ship. The Galileo was being stretched and distorted as it approached the event, horizon metal glowing with strange energies, yet, instead of being torn apart as physics dictated, the ship seemed to be transforming, its structure reorganizing into something else entirely, something that better harmonized with the geometries surrounding NGC 9781X. The last transmission we received came from Dr. Reeves, his voice distorted and overlaid with harmonics that made my head ache. "They've been waiting for us. They've always been waiting. This is where humanity began and where we return." Then silence. Our damaged escape pod drifted for months before a deep space monitoring station detected our distress signal. The automated beacon had continued functioning long after our emergency supplies ran out, after we'd been forced into hibernation to conserve oxygen. The rescue mission found us barely alive, our life support systems operating on emergency power, body functions slowed to near death by the pod's primitive, suspended animation technology. Leonora never regained consciousness, dying 2 days after our rescue despite the medical team's best efforts. Brain scans showed massive neurological restructuring, similar to what we'd observed in Marcus, but far more extensive, as if her entire nervous system had been rewired for purposes we couldn't comprehend. Commander Michaels recovered physically, but requested immediate retirement upon our return to Earth. The last I heard, he had retreated to a remote mountain cabin, refusing all contact with former colleagues or the scientific community. Alexei suffered permanent neurological damage from our extended time in the faulty hibernation system, his brilliant mind now struggling with basic cognitive functions. I fared better physically, though the nightmares have never stopped. Vivid dreams of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, perceiving reality from perspectives that human minds weren't designed to accommodate. When we finally returned to Earth, 3 years had passed for us, but due to the time dilation effects near NGC 9781X, 15 years had elapsed on our home planet. The world we returned to barely recognized us. Director Wilson had died 5 years before our return. Operation Void Gazer had been officially scrubbed from all records. Our mission reclassified as a standard deep space exploration that had met with unfortunate accidents. The new NASA administration treated us with polite distance, accepting our reports but filing them away without comment. No debriefing, no follow-up questions, just silence and an unexpected early retirement package with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. Compensation that felt more like hush money than recognition of our sacrifices. Commander Michaels accepted his fate, buying a remote cabin in Alaska where he could avoid the crowds and questions. His final words to me were a warning. "They're not finished with us, Eliza. What happened out there was just the beginning." Alexei returned to Russia, where I eventually lost track of him amid rumors he'd joined a monastery in Siberia. A mutual acquaintance who visited him reported that despite his cognitive difficulties, he spent his days carving intricate patterns into wooden panels, patterns identical to those we'd observed around NGC 9781X. I couldn't let it go so easily. Using connections from my earlier career, I gained access to archaeological databases, searching for the patterns Dr. Reeves had mentioned. What I found chilled me to the bone. The same distinctive swirls and shapes we'd observed around NGC 9781X appeared in ancient artifacts across Earth, not just in a few isolated locations, but on every continent, spanning thousands of years of human history. Cave paintings in France dating back 30,000 years depicted the same spiraling forms. Mesopotamian clay tablets from 5000 BCE contained the patterns as decorative borders around texts describing gods who came from the stars. Nazca lines in Peru, visible only from high altitude, reproduce segments of the patterns on a massive scale. Ancient Chinese astronomical charts showed the configurations as celestial palaces where immortals dwelled. More disturbing were the contemporary reports trickling in from astronomical observatories worldwide. NGC 9781X was growing. The patterns emanating from it had increased in intensity and frequency, visible now even through amateur telescopes, and they were changing, evolving into new configurations that astronomers couldn't explain but that I recognized immediately. They matched the final transmissions from the Galileo before we lost contact. I established a small observatory in the Colorado mountains, not far from my childhood home. With equipment purchased through anonymous cryptocurrency transactions, I monitor NGC 9781X nightly, documenting changes that official science refuses to acknowledge. The patterns have accelerated their evolution, developing complexities that suggest purposeful adaptation rather than natural phenomena. I keep my findings in a secure location, updating my research daily as new information emerges. Several times I've detected attempts to breach my computer systems, sophisticated intrusions that suggest government agencies are aware of my work, but haven't yet decided whether to shut me down or simply monitor my discoveries. Sometimes late at night, I wake from dreams of vast cosmic architectures and beings of inconceivable complexity. I find myself drawing diagrams I don't understand, writing words in languages I've never studied. The compulsion feels external, yet intimately connected to my consciousness, as if something is trying to communicate through me. My latest dream was the most vivid yet. I stood on the event horizon itself, neither falling in nor escaping, watching as the Galileo completed its transformation. The ship's metal and composite materials had become something else entirely, a structure that existed simultaneously in our dimension and several others. Julia, Marcus, and Dr. Reeves moved within it, their forms altered but recognizably human, studying our universe from the border between realities. They saw me watching and reached out not to pull me in, but to share knowledge, showing me glimpses of what they'd learned since crossing the threshold. The entities within the singularity weren't hostile, they explained, merely so advanced that their attempts at communication seemed destructive to our limited perception. They had created thousands of modified black holes throughout the galaxy, each serving as both observation post and invitation to species with sufficient technological development to approach them. When I asked why, the answer came not in words but in concepts that stretched my understanding to its limits. All intelligent life eventually reaches an evolutionary bottleneck that can only be overcome through transcendence beyond physical form. The black holes were gateways, allowing this transition without the extinction events that typically accompany such evolutionary leaps. I woke from that dream with a nosebleed and the unshakable certainty that it wasn't merely a dream. Somewhere beyond the event horizon, my former colleagues continue to exist in a form I can barely comprehend, and they're trying to prepare humanity for what comes next. Last week, I caught my reflection in a mirror and noticed something I'd been too busy to see. Subtle changes in my eyes, a faint luminescence visible in certain lighting, similar to what I'd observed in Julia's eyes before we lost her. My dreams have become more coherent, less frightening, as if I'm gradually developing the capacity to understand what was previously incomprehensible. I've begun receiving messages, not through conventional channels, but embedded in the background radiation I monitor from NGC 9781X. When processed through algorithms I developed based on my dreams, they resolve into diagrams and instructions. I've started building something in my basement, though I'm not entirely sure what it will be when completed. The components come from ordinary electronics, but the configurations are unlike anything in current human technology. The black hole isn't just a place, it's coming here. Not physically, the entities don't work that way, but their influence spreads through channels we're only beginning to detect. And part of me, the part that's changing, is beginning to welcome it. I've started noticing others like me. A physicist in Tokyo publishing papers with equations that mirror my dream knowledge. An artist in Buenos Aires creating installations that perfectly reproduce the patterns from NGC 9781X. A 12-year-old girl in Nairobi who suddenly began solving mathematical problems that have stumped professionals for decades. We're finding each other, drawn together by shared visions and complementary knowledge. None of us fully understands what we're building toward, but the compulsion to continue is irresistible. It feels like the next step in human evolution, guided, perhaps even engineered, but not entirely forced upon us. Sometimes I wonder if I should be fighting harder against these changes, clinging to my humanity as I've always understood it. But then I remember what I glimpsed beyond the event horizon. Civilizations that transcended their physical limitations, consciousnesses that span galaxies, knowledge accumulated over billions of years. They're returning for their children, and I don't know if humanity is ready for the reunion. But readiness may be irrelevant now. The process has already begun, accelerating with each passing day. I can feel it in my changing perceptions, in the new connections forming between previously separate areas of knowledge. The truth about NGC 9781X isn't that it's alien, it's that it's more deeply connected to our origin than we ever suspected. We are stardust, as the old saying goes, but some of that dust came from places and processes far stranger than conventional stellar evolution. As I write these final notes, I'm aware that they may someday serve as a record of humanity's last moments before transformation. Not an ending, but a metamorphosis. The cocoon doesn't fear the butterfly, though the caterpillar might tremble at the prospect of dissolution. The signals from NGC 9781X intensified again last night. New patterns, new information flooding into my makeshift equipment, overwhelming the storage systems. I dreamed of standing with Julia and Marcus on the edge of the singularity, looking outward at the universe with new senses that perceived the underlying connections between all things. "It doesn't hurt," Julia told me, her form shifting between human and something gloriously indefinable. The fear is the hardest part. After that, it's like remembering something you always knew, but had forgotten. I woke with equations flooding my mind, solutions to problems I hadn't even known existed. My hands can barely keep up with the concepts, scrawling diagrams and formulas across any available surface. The device in my basement is nearly complete, though its purpose remains elusive. Something about creating a localized field that allows for partial dimensional shifting, a prototype of the larger transformation to come. They're returning for their children, and I don't know if humanity is ready for the reunion, but I'm beginning to understand that readiness may be irrelevant. The universe has its own timeline, its own purposes that extend far beyond our limited perspective. The black hole isn't just a place, it's coming here. And part of me, the part that's changing, is beginning to welcome it.